Hello again, this is Susan White, and we are now on session number 2. And I want to say I'm so glad that you're back. I'm hoping that you did the grief assessment exercise that I left you with, because it does make a difference of where you're at and when you experience grief and trauma. So I hope you found that interesting and kind of examining your life. I love teaching this course, and one of the reasons is that you wonderful people come to a class or a workshop because you want to help other people, and that is awesome. But what happens along the way is that you find out things about yourself and about your family and friends and why they acted the way they did and why they responded. And it's a time to give your family and friends some grace and not be so judgmental of why they did, as you're going to explore in these sessions to come, but also for yourself. I think it is so important. I've seen so many people take this course and they always felt guilty, or they didn't understand why they reacted the way they did to a situation, and they would feel guilty, or they just didn't understand. They couldn't remember things. And now, with the information that they have, they've been set free. And I believe some of this information is going to set you free when we get through with all these sessions. You see, there's nothing like understanding that mercy triumphs over judgment. And the knowledge that you have and understanding now, you won't be so critical of yourself, and you'll give yourself some grace. So let's jump into this next session, and this is about the crisis reaction. And so when we talk about a crisis reaction, as far as this course goes, it's going to be any uncontrollable life event. So that's pretty broad. But we want to talk too about, what does Webster's dictionary say that a crisis is? It's an emotional, significant status of change in a person's life. So we know that that encompasses many different things. Let's explore some of the crisis reactions and crisis that you may be involved with and don't even know with people around you. People going through a divorce, it's very traumatic. It's traumatic for the husband and wife, but what about the children? How about the in-laws and the aunts and the uncles? They all have to face different emotions when they're going through something that's painful like that. And sometimes they maybe have seen it coming, and other times they may not have. And it is an emotional, significant life change for many different people. How about a loved one that is incarcerated? They're put in jail. Talk about isolation. How does a mother or father, brother or sister, it's just not something that they go and, broadcast. They need a friend. They need someone that they can talk to. They might be ashamed. They might be embarrassed. They might feel guilty. They might feel responsible. A life change status for many people in that situation. And of course, what about a loss of job? What if your company downsizes and all of a sudden you were the main breadwinner and you're the person that you feel responsible for taking care of your family, your self-esteem, so many different things. You don't know how you're going to handle things financially. How are you going to make the mortgage payment? The shock that takes place when something like this happens to you. The question is, how do we respond to other people? And of course, terrible victimization, rape, homicide, domestic abuse, drunk driving. We could go on and on with the types of crisis that people face in their life. So we want to explore today what it's like and what happens to a person when some of the worst information and the worst news can happen to somebody. And so that's what they call the crisis reaction. It's kind of common denominators of things that happen to people. Not to everybody, not in the same time frame, not in the same cookie cutter idea. These are things that people can begin to identify. We used to call this like a type of crisis training when we were out in the field, and we knew that we had to prepare people for what they had to go through. And so it doesn't mean that every situation is the same, but here's some common denominators. Most of us, we live in a very, very stressful life, just trying to get by on a daily basis. And so we have one stress upon another stress, and sometimes we handle things very well. But if you ever notice, like if you are going through a divorce and all of a sudden you have a flat tire or you get a bounce check or something else happens, the water's turned off, you find yourself not handling it very well or going off the top, and you're trying to figure out, normally this doesn't upset me. Normally I'm just fine with it. Well, there's a reason, because those are acute stressors on top of other stressors. I remember an example of, before I knew any of this, I worked as a public service aide, and we handled crimes where there was no suspect, just, petty things. And I went to this house, and it was on a smashed mailbox, and it was an old man, and he was unglued. He was absolutely irate. You would have thought somebody burned his house down, and he was beside himself. Well, I realized at the time, but not like I did years later after, becoming understanding of the crisis reaction. This man, his wife, had just passed away, I think 2 or 3 months before this incident. He'd already replaced the mailbox like 3 times. And that was not an easy task for this old man, financially, much less physically. So he, what I considered at the time, overreacted for that situation. So when we see people sometimes overreacting, or we think is overreacting, there's usually something underlying that's going on a little bit more. And so to have patience and compassion for that person, and if you have the opportunity to explore what is really the seed, the deep root problem that's going on in a person's life. So like I said, we're going along in life, and we're just doing the best that we can until we often have something happen to us or get some news that is most distressing. So I kind of did a little scenario to try to put it in a kind of simplified form, and I called this crisis reaction, I called it the sting reaction. And I used the story of going out into the countryside. And as you're out there in the field enjoying all the beauty in nature, you park your car, you go out and you look and see all that God has out there, and all of a sudden you are stung by a wasp on your hand. And you freak out. And you begin running and screaming. And you don't even think about getting your car and jumping in your car to get help. You just start running down the road trying to find somebody to be able to help you. And which seems like an overreaction. But what the problem is that you know that you can die from this, that you can have an allergic reaction, that you're going to die. And so you go into the fight or flight syndrome, and you take off and you run and you do things that doesn't seem to make sense to other people. And so you go there, and so what we call that is, it depends on who you are and where you are whenever the sting happens to you. And we call it the impact phase. And into this impact phase, this is when you first get the information, when something first happens to you. Just like the sting, it was so painful, it was so difficult, that you think your breath, you can't hardly breathe. It's so horrible. Your hand goes numb. You're not sure what you're going to do, but you can remember every detail. You can remember the smell of the flowers. You can remember everything that's going on around you. Like I said, so this is a difficult time. Your processes, sometimes they shut down, and sometimes they become very acute. We call it the fight or flight syndrome. You take off and run. Sometimes we call people heroes, and they should be called heroes. But sometimes we think people aren't very brave. Maybe there's a airplane crash, and it was on fire, and some people ran and helped other people, and other people just froze. And we think poorly of that person. But we don't know. They could be in a frozen state that they couldn't help, and they couldn't do anything. The impact phase is when we get news, maybe of cancer or some kind of terminal illness, horrific accident, the death of a loved one. And it hits us so hard that we can't think. Our brain begins to shut down. We can't even think of our name. We can't think of the name of the loved one. And this is a difficult time to be able to help someone and to be able to walk them through this. And this is what we did as victim advocates. We came in at this phase. You won't always find people in this phase. And that's very important as we get through and talking about these phases or stages or however you want to identify them. You as a helper will need to know where you're at in their healing process. Are they right now into the worst nightmare? Are they in the impact phase of this? Because if they are, they're going to be in shock. They're going to be in disbelief. They're going to be in denial. All of these are really part of God's inner protective mechanisms to help people get through. And depending on what the situation is, it can last hours. It can last days. It can even be months, depending on the situation and the person and the closeness of that trauma to that person. These reactions are what we call normal or common in any kind of life event. Homicide, sudden unexpected death, and major tragic events have the most complicated factors. Just think of this last mass shooting. I can't imagine the trauma and all the different people and the sights and the sounds and what they will have to work through. They're in shock. They're in disbelief. They're in denial. And you know, the amazing thing, it's in this particular impact phase where people are supposed to be able to function. They're supposed to be able to think clearly. This is where funeral arrangements are made. Isn't that amazing? Something as important as funeral arrangements have to be made under such stress. So that's why sometimes if you feel badly that maybe you wished you had done something different at a funeral or sang a different song, or you don't know why Aunt Martha did what she did and why did they do it this way or do it that way. It very well could be that they were just in shock. They were just functioning the best they could under the situation because all these other stressors were coming in and being able to overtake them where they couldn't make, complete decisions that they might regret later. But you see, if you realize you were just doing the best that you could under the situation, there's freedom in that. Now, the next, what we talk about is after that sudden information, that sudden thing that happened. Let's take like a hurricane. At first, most things that happen is people are so relieved that they're alive and their loved ones are alive. And it's great and it's wonderful. But then the moment is when they look around them and the reality comes. They don't have a house anymore. They don't have their possessions that they have anymore. They don't know where they're going to go to work. They don't know what to do. And this is a phase in which we call a recoil. I called it, when I was using the hand, as the allergic reaction, where it's just uncontrollable. They're trying to give you medication. It's the swelling comes, the swelling goes. It's a difficult time. You feel like you're going to die. Some days you wished you would, just to not have to face what all you have to face that's so painful. It seems like the antidote to this takes way too long, and the pain still continues to go on. And you relive the event over and over and over again. It's what we call the roller coaster of emotions. Now, how long this lasts? It depends, again, on the severity. It depends on other acute stressors, other things that are going on. Take the flooding. What if your house was flooded by Harvey, but you don't have the finances to really do anything with it? What if you have an elderly person that you're trying to take care of on top of that situation? You see, that's going to take a lot longer and more issues to deal with and more acute stressors. Our society really places an unrealistic and invisible timetable on grief and loss, even of possessions and things. We want people to hurry up and get better. We want to fix it. We want to make it better. Just do it. And even individually, you may want to do that. Individually, you may want to help fix somebody. And there's no quick fix. It's a journey. It's something to be able to process through. With love and support, we see that people do overcome. And the spirit of man is amazing. And that's why we need to make sure that there's somebody that's there that can care to help them get through this. This is where people can have panic attacks. And then this is also a place where reality begins to place of what's actually happened. The reality that the loved one's not coming back. The reality is that you don't have your home anymore. The reality that you don't feel safe in public places anymore. This is also a place where you can find people that are a little more difficult to love. And this is where we get the opportunity to love the unlovely, because they may not be able to help themselves. They may be in such an emotional mess. But it's where you, with the Holy Spirit, listening, being available, can make a difference in that person's life. Letting them process through, not judging them, not rushing them, allowing them to talk, allowing them to express their emotions without saying, you shouldn't feel this way, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. You see, no matter who you are, you want it to be over with. You want healing. You want to be in a recovery place. You want things to get back to normal. But there's so many events that happen that it has to be a new normal. Some people can never go back to normal. Some events it will. But some crisis and some trauma, people's lives are forever changed. And they need to know that they can have hope. Hope with a new beginning. Hope with a new life. What's hard is when you're beginning to have this recovery. You know, this is can be a good thing. This is where parents of murdered children and Mothers Against Drug Drivers and some of these wonderful support groups and grassroots movements began. People needed to do something with their pain. They wanted to do something that was going to make a difference in the loss of their loved one. And so they got involved and they began to change laws and they began to do things and they became invested into life again. And that's right for some people. For some people it's not. But for many people it is great healing to be able to step out and do something for others. This is where you can find support groups for people that can be quite helpful. I believe in them, but not everybody, will want to participate in that. So this is this recovery is something that we all want. We want to learn how to manage the pain. We want to be able to help people integrate this change, integrate back into life again. And then the thing that's kind of odd to me is that there's certain things that happen that are on an outward sign. And people will carry those scars and people will see and know. But there's certain things that happen to people that are so painful and so emotionally wounded. They walk around and you have no idea that these people have such trauma in their life. And I'll never forget the reality that I had of working with all the different crime victims that I did, and realizing that when I was in a group of people, whether I was sitting in church or in some kind of event, if you could just look down the row, and you look down the row, you realize, wow, if 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 is been in a rape or domestic violence, who there's loved one was killed in a car crash, it begins to change your perspective as you look at people, as you're sitting in a group with them, that you realize through the Holy Spirit that people are hurting, and we have the help. We have something within us that can be encouragement and helping them. Because that's what we want to do, is be able to get people into this recovery place, into the healing. And like I said, there's no timetable. People get nervous because years ago they called them stages, and then they were phases, and then they were putting time clocks on it. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about there is a time frame where many people go through the same emotion. And if you can find yourself in that, it can be helpful. When I've gone through a traumatic event, because I have the information, knowledge became very powerful to me. I would realize that I was really normal for this abnormal situation that I was going through. So I hope it helps you, but I hope it helps the persons that you're working with, the ones that you're ministering through when you're a healing prayer room, that realize that where is this person in this particular timetable? All the things I said often overlap with a whole range of emotions. And like I said, this is an opportunity to love people unconditionally. In our next session, we're going to be talking about grief and loss. And you'll see the parallels of the reactions. And we're talking about the shock and loss and grief. We're going to spend more time doing that. So that'll be in our next session. So as we end this today, remember, be a servant of mercy and release that power of compassion that's in you. Till next time.